Hello, everyone, and welcome to Manitoba Agriculture Crop Talk webinar. If you have any questions during the presentation today, you can type them into the Q&A located on the bottom toolbar of the Zoom screen, and we will answer them at the end of the presentations. This webinar is being recorded, and those registered for Crop Talk will receive a link to the recording. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. I'd like to welcome everybody to the April 23rd edition of Crop Talk. And today, kind of fitting, we're going to have a little bit of a weather update from Alison Sass, what she's been seeing, hearing, and maybe a little bit of what happened last year and what's going to maybe happen this year. And after that, we're going to go and have Kirk on, and she's going to talk a little bit about the winter wheat crop. It's a good time to see how the crop has survived the winter. So I thought it'd be a good opportunity for Dan to come on, and let's talk a little bit about winter wheat before we get busy in the fields. And I was out yesterday afternoon. I'm in the area where we received a fair bit of snowfall over the last couple of days, and this is what some of the fields looked like yesterday afternoon, and it snowed for probably another 6 or 7 hours after this picture was taken. So probably a good 4 inches in general of heavy wet snow, and there was some pretty strong winds, so there's some banks in places as well. So Alison, I'd like you to explain why this happened, and and you could take over, Alison, and give us your update on the weather for this coming spring.
Sure, thanks, Lina. Okay, so unfortunately, I can't explain why we were getting snow, but it's not too unusual this time of year. Spring can be really unpredictable in terms of precipitation, especially in knowing the types of precipitation that can occur, and it can be really variable. Sometimes it's quite wet in April and May, sometimes it's drier. So just really unpredictable. So what I'm going to do today is I'll be giving a brief, excuse me, just gotta get my screens going. A little summary of what we saw last growing season for the 2024 growing season. Then I'll move on to some current conditions, what we're predicting for spring, and I'll close out by just giving a quick refresher on how you can access some of the data from our weather network. So while I'm giving this presentation, most of the information that I'm providing is based on the information from our weather stations and those from Environment and Climate Change Canada. So the Manitoba Agriculture Weather Program operates 120 professional grade weather stations across Agro-Manitoba. So the distribution is shown in that map there. And the idea of our network is to operate as a mesonet. So that means we're providing a regional perspective of the conditions. We're not providing extremely localized minute by minute information. So we measure all of our parameters in 15-minute interval or 5-minute intervals, and we report them in 15-minute intervals.
I think we lost. Oh, here we go. You cut out there for a bit.
Okay, yeah, my speaker stopped working for some reason, but you can hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So our stations measure in every 5 minutes, and every station measures temperature, relative humidity, wind speed, wind direction, pressure, precipitation, solar radiation, soil moisture, and soil temperature at 5 centimeter, 20 centimeter, 50 centimeter, and 100 centimeter depth. And this is a photo of one of our typical station installations. So when combined with the Environment and Climate Change Canada's stations throughout Agri-Manitoba. We have a station about every 20 to 30 kilometers, which is the ideal spacing for a mesonet. All of our stations meet world meteorological standards in terms of the installation and maintenance. So we maintain our stations at least twice a year. Every one of our stations gets 2 maintenance visits, as well as we calibrate every instrument on those stations every 3 years. And should a station need repair throughout the year, we also have 2 full-time technologists that take care of our outdoor stations and visit them as needed. So with that information in mind, we'll move on to the summary of the 2024 growing season. So this time last year, early in the spring, I answered many questions about upcoming drought. So there was a lot of concern about the dry conditions that we had during the 2023 growing season. There was lots of concerns of having a potential 2021 drought. However, one thing that was different last year was in the fall of 2023, we had quite a bit of precipitation right before the soil froze. So our soil moisture levels in the fall of 2023 were adequate in most regions. But there was still a little bit of concern into April about drought conditions. However, what did we actually see in spring of 2024? Conditions were actually very wet. So we had heavy rains throughout the province in both May and June, also higher than normal precipitation through April. And this did cause some delays in seeding progress due to the wet conditions. So in that map there, you can see all that dark blue is showing that most regions had over 150% of normal precipitation. When I'm showing these graphs, I'm going to provide a caveat that when I'm comparing to normal, normal is the 30-year average. So what would we expect to see at this same time period compared to the 30-year average? For perspective, I referred to the 2023 conditions as well. So 2023, we're seeing a dry year, and this is just a little comparison for May and June of 2023 and 2024. So 2023, there was dry conditions right from the get-go from May to the end of June. It was extremely variable. So we had a couple of pockets that were well over normal, a few that were very far below normal. So the central region was really struggling into June with dryness. Our driest station was our Brunkhilde station, which reported 18% of the normal precipitation for that period. Compared that to the 2024 beginning of the 2024 season, so same time period, beginning of May until the end of June, completely different story. The whole province was well above normal for precipitation, and the central region was actually had the highest amounts of precipitation versus the previous year, with pretty much the whole central region having over 180% of normal. Our Winkler station had the highest precipitation levels at that time with 226% of normal. So it just goes to show precipitation could be very variable early on in the season, and we have yet to see what the season's going to bring. But really, you can't depend on the previous year's information to predict the next year necessarily. So covering the rest of the growing season from last year, we did have a couple of pretty heavy rainfall events. One was in late May, around May 25th, the central region got walloped with that rainfall, and that's where on the previous map, a lot of that rainfall came from this extreme rain event. Rains continued frequently into June and July, leading to wet conditions and impeding spraying activities throughout the season. We saw some return to normal precipitation for the month of August. We had another severe rain event in September, around September 17th and 16th, and we saw some overland flooding in Steinbach and the eastern regions. Our Elma station actually recorded 206 millimeters of rain just between September 16th and 17th alone. So looking at the precipitation throughout the whole season, month by month. So here on this graph, each bar represents a different cropping region. So we have the central region in the dark blue, eastern is the light blue, interlake is the green, northwest is the darker green teal color, and the southwest is the orange. So you can see that April, May had higher than normal precipitation, especially May with some of those heavy rainfalls. June, we were getting closer to normal, with the exception of the central region and southwest. They had some heavier rainfall events as well during that time period. We were actually a little bit below normal in most regions for July and August, below normal for September in all of the regions except for the central and eastern region that had that intense rainfall, and then well below normal in October. One thing I'm going to mention as well that to keep in mind while we're looking at these graphs is and the maps is that's what's not captured in these season-long snapshots is the timing and the intensity of that rainfall. So that can play a huge role, especially in our cropping activities. If we get, it may say that we have lower than normal rainfall for a given, oh, sorry, I skipped slides there, may show that we have below normal precipitation. However, if we had an extreme rain event that brought us a lot of precipitation in a very short time, that can still have significant impacts on crops. It can cause cropping damage if those storms are bringing hail along with it. So this doesn't necessarily show the full picture of the impacts that we see in our cropping systems. Moving on to temperatures. Again, we saw cooler than normal temperatures in May and June, so well below the 30-year average in June, warmer than average temperatures in May and July. And then where we saw the biggest deviation from normal was in September, where we were almost 5 degrees above the 30-year average in almost all of the regions for September. And then those temperatures continued to stay above normal into October. In terms of winds, earlier in the season, I had a lot of questions of whether we were seeing a windier year versus other years. So what I've done here is I've taken one station from each cropping region just to demonstrate some trends that we were seeing in winds over the past few years. So 2021, 2022, 2023, and 2024. The taller bars are the maximum wind speeds that we saw through that year on average. And then there's the average wind speeds. So comparing 2024 to previous years, we did have higher than previous years in terms of the maximum wind speeds, especially in the Brandon Forest area. And yeah, mostly in the Brandon Forest area, excuse me. And then the averages were also a little bit higher than previous years. The maximums, however, were not as high as 2022. That's the highest wind speeds that we have for this time period anyways. But we did see some reports of lodging in crops due to high winds, and we did have some major winds during a storm on June 12th, and then into the beginning of October as well. We were seeing winds over 100 kilometers an hour at some stations. In terms of fall soil moisture, so one thing that we do is we always take a final measurement of soil moisture right before the soil is frozen. This provides an indication of possible conditions that we'll see in spring. So the soil moisture doesn't change much during the winter because the soil and the water in the soil is frozen. So this gives us an indication of the soil conditions. So at the 0 to 30 centimeter depth, right before freeze up, more than half of the regions were showing, um, excuse me, most regions were showing more than 60% of the available water holding capacity. So that's the maximum amount of water that a soil can hold. The majority of the interlake, central, and eastern regions were above 80% of the available water holding capacity. And at the 0 to 120 centimeter depths, we're seeing similar trends with most of the central, southwest, interlake, and eastern regions showing that 80 to 100% of available water holding capacity. So pretty good conditions going into at the freeze up. One thing that we saw that was a little bit different this year as well is we had a very long frost-free period. So those soil moisture maps that I just showed, most of those stations I was waiting until mid-December to make those because the soil just wasn't freezing. So we had a longer frost-free period than average. Our woodlands and Lake Francis stations in the Interlake actually reported 156 frost-free days. And for perspective, our frost-free periods usually vary from 0 in the Northwest region to 140 days, depending on where you are. So a significantly long frost-free period this season. In terms of dry conditions, so I referred to the Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada drought monitor for this information. And what they do is they take a variety of inputs and input them into models. They take our data, Environment and Climate Change Canada data, other weather stations around across Canada, and then they input it into a variety of models. And throughout the growing season, they actually also take on the ground surveys. So farmers actually submit conditions that they're seeing at their farms. So as of March 31st, they were predicting abnormally dry to moderate drought conditions in the western portion of the province, mostly abnormally dry in those yellow regions, and also in the east. However, their outlook for the following month, so that would be until the end of April, we're not seeing any predictions of drought so far, and even the removal of those drought conditions in the southwest region. So really tough to say, especially on a day like today where we're getting rain and snow throughout the province. We don't see there being a concern for drought at this time. Currently, so since November 1st, our percent of normal precipitation levels are below normal for the majority of the province. However, this trend was not seen throughout the winter. So we actually started the winter with above normal precipitation levels, probably well into December and January. Accumulations since November 1st are the highest in the Interlake and the Paw, which are actually seeing over 100% of normal. And the eastern and southwest regions have a few areas that are well below normal. So in that 50 to 60% of normal precipitation. Again, this information is up to April 21st, so that's midnight of Monday. So it doesn't take into account the precipitation that we're currently seeing or we saw yesterday. In terms of temperatures, we are for the whole off season. So since November 1st, we're seeing below normal temperatures throughout the western region. So that's that light blue area. So about -1 degree below normal. Near normal for the central region, and then into the Interlake East and that East Central region, about 1 to 3 degrees, 1 to 2 degrees above normal, with a couple of pockets that were about 2 to 3 degrees above normal throughout the growing season, or throughout the off season, I'm sorry. Again, keep in mind this is capturing the whole off season, so it doesn't mean that every day was above or below normal. Just means on average throughout that whole period, we're seeing above average temperatures in those eastern and interlake regions. So the short-term forecast, we're seeing rain and snow continuing today. Then we're going to be drying, well, no precipitation probably in the next few days, but rain or precipitation is expected later in the week. So depending on what models you're looking at, and again, this is several days in the future, so things are very open to change in that time. Sunday or Monday, there are forecasts of precipitation in most regions. And in terms of temperatures, we're going to see probably below normal temperatures for today in most regions. Then we're going to ease up into near normal temperatures and then above normal temperatures to round out the week. For the long-term spring forecast, this information is provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada, and this is a 3-month probabilistic forecast. So over the months of April, May, and June, we are seeing a prediction. There's a 70 to 80% probability that the southwest, central, and interlake regions may see above normal temperatures. And there's a 60 to 70% probability that the northwest and the far east will be above normal. Again, I'm going to provide the caveat that this is a 3-month forecast, so it's very long term and it's very difficult to make accurate predictions this far in advance, and it's a probability. So it's saying there's a pretty good chance that we're going to see above normal temperatures, but it doesn't say how much above those temperatures it's going to be. There's no indication of timing, and it doesn't mean that every day is going to be above normal temperatures. It's just saying on average for those 3 months, we might possibly see above normal temperatures. Same thing with precipitation. We're seeing a 40 to 50% probability that precipitation will be above normal for April, May, and June time period. It's not a huge probability, so it's just a slightly above 50-50 chance that it'll be above or below normal. Again, precipitation is extremely difficult to forecast this far in advance. And it doesn't give any indication of how that precipitation is going to fall, intensity, or anything like that. So best to keep an eye on those short-term forecasts as far as making decisions go. So I'll close out just by providing a little reminder on how to access our live data as we move into the growing season. So you have a couple of options. We have our current weather viewer map. So if you go to the link above, this map is updated every 15 minutes. And we have a series of tabs on the top of the page, which you can use to select what parameter you want to see. As you zoom into the map, each dot on this map represents one of the Manitoba Agriculture Program weather stations. As you zoom in, it'll actually have the actual values pop up, so you can have a regional perspective of what we're seeing in those areas. If you click on a map and select the More Info button at the bottom, it'll bring you to our live data detailed for that particular station, as well as at the bottom of that page, you have a summary from yesterday's conditions. Again, these are updated every 15 minutes between April 1st and November 1st, and then hourly throughout the winter. So we do operate all year round. You can also go to our weather conditions and reports page and either view current conditions by station, which will bring you up to that detailed page that I showed you for our Erickson station, or you can also select a current condition summary, and that will give you a regional summary, the actual values for all of the weather parameters that we measure live. These pages, the regional pages, update hourly throughout the year. And in addition to that, every week we publish a series of maps and a crop weather report based on the previous week. Those maps include precipitation maps, heat units, including growing degree day, corn heat units, and P days, as well as soil moisture maps. So they're updated weekly for a whole season perspective, and we publish those on Mondays on the website, and they're also part of the crop report that we release. You can either view them on our website, or you can also subscribe to have this information emailed directly to your inbox. We also create special maps for special weather events. So if there's an extreme wind event, heavy precipitation event, and we also do frost maps for the final frost and the first frost of the season. We continue this as well during the off season. We publish just precipitation and temperature maps during the off season. And with that, I'd like to extend a thanks to Lionel for having me on, as well to our AgMet team, our manager, as well as our technologists who make this station work and make our network possible, as well as Mark Lysak, who does a lot of the data crunching on our end, and a special thanks to our station, our landowners that help us host stations. So without their cooperation, we wouldn't have a network as great as we have. So big thanks to that. My email is listed as well on here. So should you have any questions, or if you need to request any historical data, you can send me an email directly and I'll follow up with you. And that's that for me, Lionel. If there's any questions, or we can wait till after Anne's presentation as well.
Actually, there's a few questions, so we'll deal with them right now before we go to Anne's.
Sure.
Do we have updated 30-year average that is from 1990 to 2020?
We do. So my colleague Mark and I have actually been working on a new set of normals that will actually run from, I can't remember the dates off the top of my head, but even past 2020, so all the way up to 2023, I believe, or 2022. And we've created a way to obtain these normals. So in the past, we've been reliant on the normals provided by Environment and Climate Change Canada, which have been great. However, there's always a delay in getting that information. So they only publish their normals every 10 years, I believe. And this past year, they actually had to do a lot of data crunching on their end because they have automated stations, manual stations that they were trying to combine. So we still haven't got the 2020 data or 2022 data, I believe, for that. So we've combined a lot of different sources of data, including the Environment Climate Change Canada. We've been able to ingest the data from our stations because we've had some out for long enough to create normals with, as well as a few other long-term data sources, so European space agencies, etc. So starting in May, we're just kind of going through the back end, making sure that our normals are aligned properly. And so as of May 1st, we'll be using the new normals in our predictions and our maps, and that will be using our new normals for that.
Okay, another question. Analyzing the average temperatures / precipitation for each month is a great way to understand how weather is impacting crops at a specific growth stage. Would it be possible to determine or show critical periods of high temperatures for specific crops? The most relevant example of this would be determining the number of days with daytime highs above 28 and nighttime lows above 16. And this would help us understand heat blast implications for canola.
Yes, there is a way to do that. I wasn't able to show that in this short time, so that's part of the downside to having all this information and having to cover a whole province in 30 minutes, as we can't show everything. But I actually have been in talks with our oilseed specialist, Sonia Wilson, on doing that. I'm not sure the best way to disseminate that. So maybe that's something I could do a crop talk on in July when we're seeing those hot periods. And I'm also going to work with Sonia and our data team as well to kind of go back in time and see how things have changed over the last few years in terms of seeing those heat blasts. So yes, there is a way to do that, and yes, we want to do that, and we'll let you know when we've done it.
Okay, great. There was another comment, but I'm not sure, maybe Aaron did it, but somebody was asking if you could put the link in the chat for getting to the weather stations.
Yeah, I did answer that, Lionel. I just said I'm going to send the link in the email that I send out with the recording after.
Great, thanks, Aaron.
You can
One more.
also, oh, sorry, you can also Google Manitoba agriculture weather, and that'll take you to that site as well.
Great. Another one is, I'll get to this one. Recently on the news, they've been talking about drought conditions, and they've been talking about issues with fires. Would they be using the information from just Environment Canada, or because when I looked at the information you were giving, we're maybe not as an extreme drought conditions as they were maybe saying on the news? Hi, Alison. Aaron, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, so I seem to have lost Alison there, but okay.
I'm back.
Oh, you're
I
back. Okay.
missed that whole question.
You missed the whole question. Okay.
Yeah,
So I guess
sorry.
what I was asking was recently on the news, they've been talking about uh, drought conditions and potentials for fires being an issue, grass fires, and then when I looked at your information and you were showing that we're kind of not in a drought situation, we're maybe drier than average, but we're still not extreme. So would they be just taking information from the Environment Canada, or?
It depends. I haven't seen that on the news lately, but I'm not doubting that they're saying that. It has been looking at the precipitation, it's dry. Um, but again, after today, a variety of things change, and there's always a risk of um, fires in the spring if we haven't had a lot of precipitation as well. So just because the grass is really dry as well. So we haven't started greening up things yet. I from my perspective, I'm not seeing droughttish conditions. Uh, However, saying that there's all different ways to categorize drought as well. So when I'm speaking drought, I'm talking agricultural drought. So is this going to impact crops? What are we seeing in terms of soil moisture? That kind of perspective. However, if you do have an extended period of dryness and there's fuel, so dry grass, dry vegetation, again, trees haven't started leafing up yet, then there's always potential for wildfires exist. But at this point, from my perspective, I'm not seeing drought conditions in the agricultural regions anyways.
Okay, there's another comment. One comment was great job, Alison. And there's another one that I'll forward you the information, and then you'll be able to talk to them personally and get that organized. Okay.
For sure.
And
Thanks very much.
I thank you for doing it, Alison. Like usual, great information, and thanks for coming on. What we'll do now is we're going to jump right into Ann Kirk's presentation on assessing the winter wheat crop. And Ann, if you want to grab the screen, and you can get started right now.
Okay, thanks, Lionel. I will just getting this set up here. Okay, I think that's set up properly. So I'll just be talking about the winter cereal crop. It's timely now that temperatures are warming up and we're starting to see crops greening up a bit. So just to cover seeded acreage for winter cereals this past year, so we were at about 37,000 acres of winter wheat and about 85,000 acres of fall rye. You know, fall rye has been fairly consistent the last few years. Winter wheat has obviously dipped down quite a bit, but we are seeing some acres of winter wheat being planted. For fall rye, just to cover the hybrid versus open pollinated acres. So the previous slide, the 87,000 was all fall rye acres. We are seeing the majority of the acres being planted as open pollinated varieties. So yeah, about that 50,000 as open pollinated and just over 30,000 as hybrid. So when we're assessing winter cereals, this was a picture that I took last week around Notre Dame. So you can see, the fields are starting to green up. It is fairly early to just visually assess a field from above and to see, to assess the winter kill or if there's any winter injury issues with the winter wheat or fall rye crop. It's tricky at this time of year because sometimes the crop looks green, but it might not be alive. Other times it's very slow to get going, but it's perfectly alive and well. And we definitely see fall rye crops looking a lot better than winter wheat at this time of year. So fall rye does tend to have an advantage and a head start on the winter wheat. It greens up quite a bit faster and starts growing earlier. So for winter cereals survival, winter cereals break dormancy when temperatures are consistently above zero. So if we actually are looking to see the survival in the field, we need to wait for the crop to break dormancy and develop new roots. So the picture I have here on the right-hand side is what you'd be looking for if you're digging up plants. So at this time of year, you should be able to see some new white roots coming from the crown of the winter wheat or fall rye. So when you dig up your plants, you can wash off those roots and then should be able to see some new root growth, indicating that the crown is alive. When it's too early to walk the field, so a few weeks ago when it was too early to see any new growth in the field, you could be using other methods to assess winter survival. And I should also say that although fields appear to be greening up, I think that it's important to wait at least another week or so to really assess if there was any winter kill in your crop, especially in some of those areas where they did see snow, it might take a little bit longer to see any greened up plants, but it is still fairly early to assess the winter survival of the plants just by looking above ground. So this is just an example of one of the methods that could be used to assess winter wheat survival early on. So this is a picture from March. So if you are able to get into the field and dig up some plants prior to the plants starting their growth, you can dig up some plants, put them in some pots or a pail, keep them watered and bring them inside somewhere warm. And you should be able to see new growth within about a week. So if there is no new growth and the roots aren't growing, then the plant hasn't survived after that 1 week period. And these might be important methods to do if you have concerns about your winter wheat survival just due to the winter conditions or how the crop looked in the fall, if you're trying to make new cropping plants at this time of year. Another one, which is a quick and easy way also to show if the crown is alive, is to dig up some plants, before they started growing new roots, rinse off the whole plant, and then cutting off, you clip roots below the crown and the stems about an inch above the crown. If you put them in a plastic bag somewhere warm in your house with air in it, if that bag is at room temperature and the plant's rinsed off every couple of days, you will see new growth fairly quickly, indicating that the crown is alive. And if there's no new growth after about a week, you'd consider those plants dead. So this picture here is from 2 days after doing this bag test. So like I said, you would see new growth fairly quickly here. So this is a picture from last Wednesday or Thursday at the U of M farm where we have some winter wheat planted. So this is the picture on the left is winter wheat. It does look fairly green, and we do see some new roots. But at this time of year, like I said, we'd have to wait a little bit longer just to assess how the crops look in the field. This is a graph from the Wheat Workers website where they're looking at where they're using a model to indicate if the plant may have suffered any winter kill injury. So there are temperature sensors in the ground at the diversification centers in Manitoba. It's not like an ideal situation because the temperature sensors are at 3 centimeter depth, but under grass. So a little bit of a different situation than you would have in a field. So they're measuring the soil temperature at 3 centimeters depth under grass, and then using a model to assess the cold tolerance of a winter cereal crop. So at Carberry, Roblin, and Arberg, the models looked fairly similar. So there was no risk of winter kill and no winter kill days, as the soil temperature at that 3 centimeter depth remained well above the cold tolerance of those winter cereal crops. At Melita, it was a bit of a different story this year. So there were quite a few instances where the soil temperature was below, was below the cold tolerance of that winter cereal crop. So this isn't to say that winter cereal crops in this area will have winter injury. It's just kind of an indication that you should be cautious and be checking to see how those fields look. And everyone knows, any individual farmer could assess what their risk of winter kill is based on how that crop looked in the fall, if it was well developed going into winter, if there's a good hardening off period, and if there's enough stubble for snow catch. So I know that in many parts of the province, we didn't have a lot of snow on fields, but if there was stubble for snow catch, there should have been enough snow to maintain those warm enough soil temperatures. So some management factors that influence winter survival. So these are the things that you would think about when, prior to the crop greening up to determine, what your risk might be. So stubble height is definitely a big factor. So making sure there's high enough density of stubble at a high enough height to trap snow and maintain warm temperatures at that crown depth. Seeding date. So if we do have crops off fairly early, it's like a canola crop off fairly early, it is tempting to seed pretty early, your winter cereal crops pretty early in the season. But if we do seed too early, the crown can get too big and be more susceptible to freezing. So it's best to stick with those ideal winter wheat or fall rye seeding dates of like early to mid-September, and even pushing it back further in September than going too early. So seeding depth, ideally you'd want to be planting your wheat no more than an inch deep. If it is seeded too deep, it can take longer for that crop to emerge, and then have weaker plants with less developed crowns just because they needed more energy to push out of the soil. And when we talk about seeding depth, often it is fairly dry when we're seeding winter cereals, but it's more important to stick to that about 1 inch seeding depth than seeding deeper to chase moisture, just because we don't want those weak plants going into winter. And then adequate fertilization. So phosphorus fertilizer is really important for good fall establishment and recovery from winter injury. So making sure that some of that phosphorus does go down with the seed. So if we are in a situation where someone is concerned about their winter wheat stands, the best idea is to go into the field and actually assess what your stand of winter wheat or fall rye is, and also how patchy it is to make some decisions in the spring. So ideally, we'd want a winter wheat around that 20 to 25 plants per square foot. There is ongoing research with Ducks Unlimited where they're looking at winter wheat plant stands at a variety of different plant stands, but it hasn't been published. It hasn't wrapped up quite yet. That'll be interesting to see their updated research. Previous research has shown that even if you have a plant stand as low as, say, 7 to 8 plants per square foot, it could still yield about 80% of a normal stand. The more important thing is how even that plant stand is. So if you have, 8 plants per square foot and it's fairly even across the field, I wouldn't be too worried about that crop. But if you do have it and it's sparse in some areas, that would be a different story. So this is just research showing the winter wheat plant stand and yield at a bunch of different locations. So the on-farm network with Manitoba Crop Alliance also looked at winter wheat seeding rate in 2025, and I believe they repeated it in 2026, or for this next growing season as well. So for this research, the farmers planted at their regular plant density, which was the yellow bar, and then 30 pounds above and 30 pounds below. And there were no significant differences in yields across those winter wheat varieties, or across those different plant stands for winter wheat. So just a good lesson on the winter wheat plant's ability to tiller to make up for that lower plant density. For fall rye, open pollinated and hybrid fall rye would have different target optimum plant stands. One of the potential reasons for this is that open pollinated fall rye is quite a bit less expensive than hybrid fall rye. Hybrid fall rye seed is very expensive, so we would typically be targeting a little bit of a lower plant density. But these are just the ideal plant densities for fall rye. You'd want to be targeting about that winter wheat plant stand. And for hybrid fall rye, you'd be targeting about that 16 to 18 plants per square foot would be a reasonable plant stand. So if we're managing pour stands, if we have fields with small patches of pour stands, the best option typically is just to leave the field and focus on strategies like good weed control, early application of nitrogen to encourage tillering, and increased disease scouting. If we end up with fields where we have large patches of pour stands, it's a bit of a trickier situation, and replanting may become a more realistic option, depending on, what time of the year it's discovered that field has large patches of pour stands and some of your other management considerations. So you'll obviously want to contact MASC before destroying any fields, just to make sure they're aware of your plans. Try to avoid replanting that winter wheat to cereals, especially wheat, if you do have a risk of wheat streak mosaic. And if you do decide to replant to spring cereal, you typically want to have 2 weeks with no living green material to try to mitigate the risk. You could also consider planting a crop into those bare patches, typically just for weed control. So you could plant winter wheat into those larger gaps. Since it won't vernalize, it would just produce some ground cover. Potentially spring wheat could be planted into those gaps, just keeping in mind that if you can't keep them separate at harvest, there would be an issue with potentially having your wheat just meeting the feed wheat class. The other issue, if you're planting winter and spring wheat in the same field, is just harvest management and management for FHB would be a bit difficult, since they'd be heading at different times. If we're looking at terminating pour stands of winter wheat, it is important to remember that winter wheat is quite hard to kill. So tillage and burn down herbicides wouldn't likely control all plants, especially if some are suffering injury and slow spring regrowth. So those plants do have to be actively growing to be controlled by those herbicides. So if regrowth is quite slow, you could end up with a situation where it's difficult to kill them. And you would likely need some in-crop volunteer cereal herbicides as well in your next crop, because it's likely that all of that winter wheat wouldn't be killed. And since it's spring, I think it's just important also to consider when people are going to be getting their fertilizer on winter wheat. I'm anticipating that if fields were dry enough to be driving on, that people had likely started fertilizing or were thinking about getting out right away. Typically in Manitoba, we do recommend applying a portion of the nitrogen fertilizer in the fall and a portion in the spring. Applying all of it at one time of the year can be risky. In the fall, we can have excessive top growth, which could reduce winter hardiness, and also more risks of loss for leaching and denitrification. If we're planning to apply all of the nitrogen fertilizer in the spring, if we do have a dry spring, can be difficult for that nitrogen to actually reach the plants. Or if it's quite wet, it could be applied later than ideal. So we do know that wheat uses a lot of its nitrogen. This graph shows that it uses about 82% of its nitrogen by flowering. And by the 5 to 6 leaf stage, which comes up pretty quick in the spring, it uses 30 to 40% of its nitrogen. So if the nitrogen gets on late or the plant's not able to access it because it's stranded at the top of the soil, there is definitely yield implications with that wheat not having access to the nitrogen. So that's all I have for winter wheat assessment at this time. I'm not sure if there's any questions.
Yeah, actually, there's a couple. One is uh, with the recent weather we've been getting and evenings still getting fairly cool. Could that damage any of the winter wheat, especially if areas where maybe there's standing water, or if we get down to -5 or something like that and the ground freezes?
Yeah, I wouldn't be too worried about like, since the crown of the winter wheat is about an inch below the surface and it's just slowly dehardening, I wouldn't be too concerned about cold temperatures and winter cereals at this point. The standing water would be the bigger risk. Since the winter wheat is actively growing and respirating, if it's in standing water for a long period, say over 4 days or over a week, we'd be looking at those plants dying off just because they're not able to access oxygen at that point. So yeah, standing water is definitely a risk as well. And with those lower temperatures, like we are seeing a lot of nights where it's below zero still, that just at this point is going to mean that it's going to take longer for that winter wheat and fall rye to start actively growing. And the more colder temperatures we have, the longer it'll take to see how that winter wheat actually looks in the field.
Okay, and then a comment. Somebody said that they seen a field of green field on the weekend in the Miami area. But just like you had commented, just because it's green doesn't mean it's alive, right? Could be last year's green, right?
Yeah, it is really tricky to see because often it does look green before that plant has even actively started growing. So you do need to make sure that you're assessing it after I think I said 10 days or so of temperatures above zero to actually have that active growth.
Okay, and just another comment saying, great job, Anne. Thanks. And that's what I was just about to say. Thanks, Anne. That was a lot of good information, and it's kind of timely too, because we're into that time period now where we're going to be doing more out in the field and doing a lot more checking. So thanks again, Anne, for doing that update today.
Thanks, Lila.
Okay, just a few more things before we finish up for today. Had this panel up last week. Main reason for this one is the field crop production guides are available. They're available at all the MASC offices, or if you get a hold of any of our staff, they'll be able to either get you a book or find a way to get you some of the books if you're looking for larger orders. If you want to contact Kim Brown at the Carmen office, that would be probably the best way of doing that one. Dates to save. I know seems like a long way away, but it's probably not when we get thinking and get out there working. But the diversification centers tours are coming up. July 17th, 30th, August 5th, and August 6th. So mark those dates in your calendar. It's going to be some good information as usual. And if you want to contact any of the diversification centers, here's their contact information. I did take some soil temperatures, and if you look in the bottom corner of this slide, you can see that soils, and this would be in the kind of the north of 16 highway, I guess. So where temperatures were still kind of cool, we're still, definitely not good seeding temperatures yet. So we still have a little ways to go. I did hear of some seeding happening in the eastern side of the province last week, but I think that was maybe just a few guys doing some scratching to get things set. Again, if you have questions or concerns, or you're looking for information, this is the crop production extension specialist. we're in the process of finding fields for disease surveys, for putting out insect traps. If you're interested in working in any of those programs, give us a call. We are definitely looking for quite a few fields, so would save us some time and some work if you got a hold of us. And if you could do that, that would be great. Our livestock specialists, these are located throughout the province, and right now we're in a lot of cases right into calving or getting close to the end of the first round of calving for some people. So if you have any questions regarding that or regarding getting ready for pasture, definitely give these people a call. And there's our MASC offices, and there's another picture of the book. And I see there's been maybe some questions coming in, so I'm just going to check. Crop Protection Guide PDF has the index page as clickable links. Thank you very much, whoever did this year. I've been doing it myself for multiple years of using the Alberta Guide, which has the past, make using it so much nicer than a paper copy. Well, that's good to know that some of the work that there's a large group of people from our staff that work on that book, and I'm sure they'll be glad to hear that some of the stuff that they are doing is making the book easier to use and more user friendly. So thanks for that comment. And one more slide to end the day. If you have any questions or any comments, anything you might want to hear, that's give us a call. There's Lori's information, my information. Join us next week, April the 30th. And next week we're going to do weed identification. We're concentrating on broadleaf weeds, and we'll have Kim Brown on. So if you can attend, that'd be great, and see you then. Thanks for attending.